This is Gemara Zevachim Daf Hey, and we're holding on Dalet Amud Beis, 3 lines before the wide lines. And all the learning for this month, the month of Elul, Anila Daidi L'Daidi Eliyah Kadosh Baruch Hu, is just waiting for us. Has been sponsored by a close friend of the Daf, as a Schos Aliyas Neshama for his mother, Esther Rייזל Basar מאיר. Psiyata Dishmaya, the incredible Koyach HaTorah, should continuously be elevating the Neshama of Esther Rייזל Basar מאיר in Gan Eden Shel Maila. We're holding 3 lines before the wide lines. Says the Gemara, Ashkechan Ayol Nazir. We found a Mekar for the Shlamim of a Nazir. But says the Gemara, Shar Shlamim Inalan. Where do we know? By all other Shlamim. Says the Gemara, you can't say that, because the ayil of a nazir is a special chumrah, that there's other dam, other karbanos that has to go along with it. Rashi says a nazir has to bring a chatas, a shlamim together with it. Answers the Gemara, you know what the makar is? Imkein nichtav shalmei, my shlamim, the rabbis kol shlamim, all shlamim are going to be included, and that's going to be the makar, that everything has to be l'shem bailim, and you can't have a shinoi bailim. Says the Gemara, okay, ashkan shlamim. What's next? Shar kol kachim minalan. Where do we know in the second white line that all other avodas have to be for the right bailim by other karbanis? Shlamim have its level of chumrah, its level of unique dinim. Number 1, there's a din of smicha. Number 2, there's a din of nisachim, pouring libations. Number 3, tenufas chaz v'shok, you have to wave the breast, the thigh. And all other karbanos are not this way. So we can't learn out from shlamim. Ella Amar Kra, and just to remind ourselves, we're in the middle of a longer conversation. Really takes us all the way back to the Mishnah of Kol Zevachim have to be Lishma. And we're learning that there's 2 types of Lishma. There's L'Shem Kodesh and then there's L'Shem Bailim. So we first started learning out all the Makairis that has to be L'Shem Kodesh. You cannot have a Shinoi Kodesh. And now we're continuing with L'Shem Bailim, going through all the different Karbanos. Says the Gemara, and from here we learn out the Torah is Hekish. The Torah compares all the other Karbanos to Shlamim to teach us Ma Shlamim bein Shinei Kodesh, bein Shinei Bailim, by both Beina Lishma. Av kol by all Karbanos bein Shinei Kodesh, bein Shinei Bailim, Beinan Lishma. Says the Gemara, and that's going to be our Mekar. But asks the Gemara, 1 second. Eima heichal teshachlu shaloi lishma lifsalu. So now that we have a Mekar that everything has to be lishma, that all the shchita, the Kabbalah, the halacha, the zrika have to be l'shem kodesh, and has to be l'shem bailim. So now the Gemara goes full circle. So if it's not that way, maybe it should be basal. Why does the Mishnah say kol zevachim sheshachtan shaloi lishma are going to be kosher? Amar Cross says Gemara 3 lines on the bottom. And the pasuk ends off like we saw back at Daf Beis, Nidava. Hi Nidava, what do you mean nadaru? Elohim kamish and nadarta asita. If you did what you're supposed to, ye neder, it's good. Ve'im lav ye nidava. It should be a nidava, meaning it should stay in its lane. It should stay in the carbon that it was supposed to be. Says the Gemara, ve'itzrech moitzis v'secha tishmar, the bottom line. Ve'itzrech zois ha'tayra. We need 2 different psukim. Says the Gemara, why? Because Rachman moitzis v'secha hava. I mean, I would have thought as we turn over to Hey Amid Aleph, I wouldn't know with which way is it might say sifasecha. In which way does it have to be precise? That which you said. Therefore, because Rachman Azay's Torah. Because Rachman Azay's Torah, if the Torah just said that, I would have thought Lifsalu, which should be possible, because Rachman Azay's. That's why we need both psukim. Says the Gemara, Rami Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish comes along And that really ends a chunk of Gemara from Beis to Hay, or Gimel to Hay, I should say, ending off the sugya of the necessity to be Lishma, L'Shem Kodesh, L'Shem Bailam. Now comes along Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish says, Al Rami Reish Lakish al Me'uhi Bei Midrasha. He was laying on his stomach in the base Medrash Umakshi, and he asked the following kasha: Im ksherim, if a carbon is kosher yiratzu, then it works, then it affects the kapara for the owner. Vim ein meratzim, and if it's not affecting for the owner, lama bayim, which really is the fundamental question on the Mishnah that we're saying, kol hazvachim sheshachtat shalishma, that they're kosher. So you still have to bring it, but it doesn't work. So as for Yisakish, I don't understand. If it doesn't work, why are you bringing the carbon? Why are you continuing the rest of the avodah? Amrli Rav Eliezer, says Rav Eliezer, Matzinu b'bayin lachar misa. We find in cases of a carbon that's allowed to be brought after the death of the owner, that what? In Kesherin Vein Meratzin, we have a makar, we have a precedent of a carbon that lachar misas bailim still has to be brought, but it doesn't work for the owner because he's dead. So what do we see? We see a makar for a carbon that might not actually do anything for the owner, but yet it still is brought. Ditanan Ha'isha, and Rashi points out what type of woman. They say this woman that gives birth has to bring 2 karbanos, a chatas and a oila. Shevi a chatas, so she brings her chatas, umeisa, then she dies. Yavi a yarshin oilasa, the yarshin bring the oila for her. Oilasa, if she brings an oila umeisa, then she dies. Lo yavi yarshin chatasa, the yarshin don't bring a chatas. So what do we see over here? We see that even though she's no longer around, the Yarshim bring an Ayla, even though it doesn't give her any Kapara. So we're going to say that's going to be the Makar. Then in our case as well, even though there's no Kapara to be had, still there's going to be a necessity to bring the carbon. Amar Lei. So Reish Lakish says, Maidino Chab Ayla. Maskim with regard to an Ayla. Why? Dasi Lachar Misa, like you just proved to me. It's brought after the Mises Bailam. But Asham, what about a carbon Asham? And what about an Asham? So Amar Lei. So Rav Elazar responds, your one that fights with you, the Tanakama, is at your side. Why? Excuse me, the one that argues with the Tanakama on the Mishnah is at your side. Because what did the Mishnah continue? The Mishnah said, Rav Eliezer, Asham. Like you just said, that the Asham is going to be completely puzzle. Amar Reish Lakish says, this is a person, they're saying, you Rav Elazar is so great. Kamina ana Mishnah Shlema. I quote a Mishnah of Amar li Rav Eliezer. Shkayach, you're telling me that Zashitas Rav Eliezer. I'm trying to understand the Tanakama. Why does the Tanakama not say about an Asham that? Elam Reish Lakish, Eftach ana Pischal in Avshoi. Says Reish Lakish, I'm going to open up an opening that's going to be good for my soul. Might say Sifaisecha v'goymer. Hi Nidava, it's a neder hu v'chulu kidlael, and he explains like above that we have a makar from the Torah that even though the carbon was not brought properly, that what's going to be the status? It's still going to have to be continued to be brought like a nidava, and that's going to be the makar. So Yosef, Rav Zira, Rav Yitzchak Barabba, Yosef Abayu Kabayu, all these gedolim are sitting. Yosef Kamri, they're all sitting around and they're saying, Kasha leila Reish Lakish Asham. Reish Lakish had a kasha from Asham. So Asi Lachra Misa. V'naslav Talmud Moitzi V'secha. And how did the Gemara just answer from the pasuk? It says the Gemara, Eima haba b'neder nadava, la'isi v'lo yiratzu. What was the pasuk that Rabbi Sivasecha is talking about? It's about a neder and a dava. So they asked, wait, maybe by a neder and a dava, that's what you're going to have to bring, even though it doesn't give you a kabara. But an asham, but when it comes to a carbon asham, lo la'isi klal, maybe we should not bring it at all because it doesn't do anything. So Amalei Abaye, Reish Lakish B'Acha Pasach, a different pasuk. V'shachat Oisa Lechatos Oisa Lishma, Shachat Oisa Lechatos, and he darshins Oisa Lishma's Kesheira Shlishma Psula. Hashar Kadshem Shalei Lishman is going to be Kisherin, it's going to be kosher. And Yachal, you would think Yiratzu, that not only if it's brought Shalei Lishma, do you bring it, but you think that maybe it's even Yiratzu would work for the Bailim. So on that, you bring the second pasuk. But says the Gemara, let's go full circle. The same kasha, Asham, Artu Inami Artu, the same kasha. Amar Abaye, so now finally Abaye explains. Asham de Marti loy matzis amrit. You can't tell me that Asham brings a kapara. Why? Kavachaimer me oila. Ma oila shein mechaperes, and oila doesn't actually give a kapara. And yet, if it's brought for the wrong intent, what's the halacha? Einoi miratze. Asham shemechaper einoi din sheina miratze. So says the Gemara, it's like Kalvachaimer. But says Gemara, whoa, 1 second, Mal Eilish King Kalil. How can you bring me a ray from an Eila? An Eila's is completely burnt. Answers the Gemara, Sham Yochichu. But Mal Sham Shekin Tuna Nisachin. Utinu Faschaz Vishaik. Eila Teichiach. So we go full circle. V'chazir Adin, La Rizek Rizev, La Rizek Rizeh. Hatzara Shavasheben. Shein Kachin. V'shachtan Shalishman. Kesherin Ve'ein Miratzin. And from here, from the Sadashave of Shlamim and Oila, we're going to learn out Afani Avi Asham Shukaite Shakli Shalishmam that it's going to be kosher. Ve'inoi miratze. But I asked the Gemara, slow down. That those karbanos are both brought b'tzibur. Says the Gemara, Taida Teichiach. The carbon Taida is going to prove because that's not B'tzibur. But it says the Gemara, 1 second, as we turn over to Hamid Beis. But Taida has its own uniqueness. Mala Taida Shkein Tuna Lechem. The carbon Taida is brought together with bread. Answers the Gemara, Oilo Shlam Yochichu. Chazrin La Rizek Rizev La Rizek Rizeh. 3 lines down in Hamid Beis. Hadashav Shemen Shein Kachav Shaklu Shalishma Kasher. V'inam Rataf Ani Avi Asham. Shu Kaide Shaklu Shalishma. That's going to be kosher. Ve'inoi miratze. But continues the Gemara, it doesn't give up. But all these cases are brought b'neder and nadav, and an asham is not. So Ella Omar Rava. So Rava comes along and Rava says, okay, anaya limud, to learn at an asham. 7 lines down. Zayis atayr v'gaymer kishu akasav l'shlamim. Ma shlamim shein kadshem v'shachtan shel lishman is kisherin v'in meratzin. Afani avi asham shu kaidesh v'chulu, and it's also going to be ein meratzin. But says the Gemara, machaz is the actual shlamim. How do you know that the pasuk should be equated to a shlamim? Maybe akish lechatos. Says Mar mir achmana oisa. So oisa excludes the chatos, but we can include the ashlamim, and that's going to be the final mikar from Zayis Hatayra, says Rava, to learn out the din by ashlamim. Continues the Gemara right after the parentheses, Yosef, Rav Huna, Rav Nachman, the Yosef, Rav Sheshes Gabayu, a similar story with the Gedolim sitting, Yosef Kamri Kasha the Reish Lakish. And they're discussing the Kasha that Reish Lakish had. What was his Kasha? Asham, Delasi Lachar Misa. The Asham that's not brought after its Misa, how do you know that it's Meratza that you still have to bring it? You have to bring it. Leimalei, Rav Elazar. Asham Nami Asam Nachar Misa. Says the Gemara, wait. Reish Lakish's whole kasha was that, wait, an oil is brought Lachar Misa, but don't bring me a riot to an Asham. Says the Gemara, wait. Maybe he held that an Asham is also brought Lachar Misa. So Amar Lehu Rav Sheishes, Asham Lemai Karev. Why is an Asham brought after the Misa, after the death of the owner? Limai Sarai, for the excess. Chatas nami mikrav karva my chatas nami mikrav karva misara. Chatas is the same, and since we find that a chatas is possible if it's brought shalei lishma, it would be the same thing by the asham. So the fact that it's brought lachar misa wouldn't help. Says Mar, wait, chatas avagav de karva misara miyot rachmanahu. The reason why a chatos doesn't work, says the Gemara, is a special limud akra, is that the Torah says who? But says the Gemara, an asham doesn't have that limud, so maybe by an asham it would work lachar misa. Explains the Gemara, asham nami ksiv behu. By Asham, we have the same miyot. Says the Gemara, slow down. How that word by the Asham is achar aktara as a murim. Hudich save is after the bring of the murim. Kidatani of Asham. Loinemar says the Brayso. By an Asham, it does not say who. Elul achar aktara is a murim. But Vatzmayim Lohiktir Murim is going to be kosher. So says the Gemara, you can't necessarily say that it's the same miyot by an asham like there's by a chatos. Ve'lahu lamalis, why do we need the who? Lech Rav Huna Amarav, Dam Rav Huna Amarav, asham shenitek l're'iyah, an asham that has to be left to graze, that you can't do anything with it. V'shachta stam, and he shechted it for no reason. Kosher, it's kosher as an oila. Says the Gemara, what's the diuk? That if it's nitek l're'iyah, if it's that it has to be, it's consigned, it's confined, it's paskin dois, that it has to be grazing, then it will be an oila. Lo nitek loy, my time, what's the reason? Amar Kro, Baviyasa, that it should stay in its state that it is, and therefore, if it's shechted with no kavana, it will not be an asham, and it will not be an oila. And that is how the reason why to say this teretz for Rish Lakish's kasha would not work. So finally, Yasser Nachman Rav Shishi Yasser Rav Adavar Masliga by Yasser Kamer Adikam Rav Elazar. So we're really dissecting the whole story. We went to Rish Lakish's problem. Now we're going to Rav Elazar. That which Rav Elazar said, Matzin B'ban Lachar Misa Shen Ksheir Vein Meratzin. Lema Le Rish Lakish Hanu Nami Leistu V'Leratzu. So why doesn't Rish Lakish respond that he says, well, can be brought and it will work? Amar Len Rav Adavar Masliga Yoledes. Im hi yalda, banam yalda. Very good. That the children are going to bring a carbon. The children didn't give birth, so how could the children get the kapara? The whole carbon is being brought for the kapara, and the mother is no longer around. Says Gemara, Maskler Avasi, Umanle Malan Diika Kama. If there are many issues, many assays, would she not get a kapara? Meaning, if a woman brings this ayla after she gives birth, and she has other mitzvahs that say that she needs a kapara, would she not get it via this carbon? Of course she would. So says Gemara, maybe not. Maybe we could have a fascinating idea that the Yarshib could bring the carbon, and they'll receive a kapara even though they bring the carbon for the mother. Says the Gemara, Lememra, if this were to be true, this would only work if the kanyalahu. This would only work if the Yarshim have a kinyan in the animal. If someone leaves a mincha for his two kids and dies, you bring it, but there's no partnership, they're not considered bailim. So clearly, there's no bailim, they're not kinyan, there's no kinyan by the kids. Says the Gemara, is that true? So says the Gemara, we don't have the next page. We're going to stop over here, but the Gemara now is going very deep and trying to figure out whether the kids have a kinyan or not, which would determine whether they could potentially have a kapara for the carbon of their mother. We'll pick it up from here. B'siyata Dishmaya.